choice, which is, I'm guessing, why this entire additional ending was added, because they probably received a lot of people commenting they didn't like the final choice. Um, Having known the outcomes now, that you do get to this point where there is no hypothetically good ending unless you have the updated version. Don't know that I would have bought the game. Um, it's not that it's a bad game. I don't like the narrative, especially saddling you with the choice so suddenly at the end. I feel is a little. There's no mental prep for what you're doing. It almost has to be an on impulse kind of choice. You don't have that much time to really think about it. But also, I feel like there's very little narrative explanation as to why. And I feel like something with that kind of gravity in the decision should at least have some sort of explanation how that comes about being the consequence.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just tell me that a person's bound by a physical object all of a sudden and just done with explaining it. My interpretations would either be that you rescue the world and the situation is more of an infinite loop experience, which I suppose wouldn't have any true suffering if the person genuinely realized that it was a loop. Um, I would hope that in that consequence of you doing as Shin did, that they would have a satisfying and happy life there, even if they were separated from their family, a new sense of family where they were. Um, I don't like though the idea of these types of choices in games. They are real, but they're usually real more in the government leader kind of sense. Most people usually don't have to make a choice between one person they care about and many people who they don't know as well. I still wouldn't even say that they don't care about them in that sense, because I feel like not caring implies perhaps a presupposition that there's a willingness for malice. Um, but either way, I feel like these kind of forced hand decisions aren't really a fair gameplay tactic fully, which again, I'm sure that's where the push for this alternate ending comes from. Um, on the bright side, I do think that we can kind of knock it out. I have a feeling that if it comes over, we can get it through, especially because the dialogue in many places is the same. So you're not going to be needing to shuffle through all the dialogue. But I would say my biggest thought on it is I'm disappointed. Um, as I said, I would have probably made the hard choice of destroying the light. Uh, because it implies that if that happens, the world ends immediately. And I feel like that goes back to the question that the guy was opining about on the balcony or whatever, that if it goes out instantly, done. Whereas in this case, in the negative interpretation of the ending you could have is it's going to slowly fade away over time regardless. And so I can see how you can have the choice be more complicated, but I don't. The world is more complicated than games make them for these kind of choices to come forward. Like I said, I disagreed with Shin, and I would have used Nico in the hardline, permanent, original one-shot concept. Um, but I feel like there's not enough understanding of how complicated life is, I think, to make these choices feel full. Because let's put this in a socio-political context that for me makes me uncomfortable because I don't really like talking about these things. But just to paint a picture, this is a hypothetical, so I'm hoping that nothing pushes anyone's butt. Well, let's say you're in charge of a country and you're making this decision about the people in the country, and to do it is going to endanger, because in this case, they're not even like killed to make this, just endanger, possibly put them at some sort of risk. Maybe it would be a situation where these people, to again put this in a realistic context, by doing this, you would have to send someone you care about to a different country for 25 years of their life. And those 25 years perhaps is the time where they have two kids and they're not going to see them grow up. Just so that there's severe gravity to this and you know and care about this person. A real person who's the leader of a country, at least I would hope in my heart of hearts, although I'm cynical enough that I don't know that that's true. A real person would still value the people of their country as people they care about because they're in this situation. They're charged with the safety of this situation. So if it was perhaps committing some sort of long-term ambassadorship that would have very little chance for, or even no chance for them to see them flagged, for example. Some sort of situation like that where there's no real way to have a legitimate connection for years on end for someone you care. It's not a bunch of people you kind of know versus one person you care about, and the people you kind of know are still ones and zeros on a screen with no true consequence going forward. Like in a real looking at it from above sense. A person with a low enough emotional intelligence, which I still think that's rude because it's not really. It's you're looking at it in a more logical versus emotional sense, but it's just that kind of world. A person with the lower emotional connection, I suppose, to those people might say that the value is on the one person they care about. Which for me, mine is the emotional bond that's built up over the game versus the small vignettes of who a person is of a bunch of different people. Meaning my value is more on Nico getting help than my value of rescuing the people who, again, in the meta context of being aware that it is a computer game, I know that in the end, the ending is instant and it's done. It's gone. In a real world situation, which this is trying to imply that the challenge of this type of choice, you have still some more emotional stock in the existence of other people. I would imagine that if you told a person on the street that they had to choose for real, not like here's a hypothetical, that they had to either hurt one person they care about or 10 people they don't, in the same consequence, which is a much smaller scale, they're still probably going to steer towards the one person they care about, which the math on this is about, like, I think it was like a 30-70 split. Most people rescue Nico. People are going to tend towards the person they care about or the people they don't. But it's not going to be a light choice that you can make into a one-button pick. It's not something that simple. It's not something that a person has that little emotional investment in someone just because they don't know. And that's why I'm sure Shin's interpretation was more on the logical, which that's why I'm able to at least spin a narrative where everything is okay in my head. It's more logically sound, which he's a very logical minded person. He talks a lot about his lack of emotional awareness, which I think more comes from the fact that he's more logically minded, not so much that he doesn't have emotional awareness. I think he's looking at it from the logical perspective of making one person unhappy to hypothetically guarantee a lot of people are happy. The value is more on making the more people happy. The needs of the many outweigh the need of the few. Is the way he's looking at it. And so I can see where he's coming from. I, as a person who has more individualist value and more concept of everything meaning more, I suppose, put more value on the one weak person trapped in a situation they didn't ask for than the people who still at the end of the day in my mind zeros in this context. I don't like the idea of the choice. I get why it's a choice in a game, and I think it's an effective function for this. But I really don't. I guess a big part of it is juxtaposing a really sincere and cute, well written, charming character with two options that both lead to what is still, in a sense, a bad ending. I think it goes back to my thing about hating the idea of hopelessness in games, which is the same reason I won't do a game like Lisa or Off or Mad Father or anything like that. I don't like the idea where the only outcome is hypothetically a negative. The only outcome has to be bad, but the choice is on you to make either bad choice. If you look at something like Undertale, the only outcome does have a negative consequence. There is a loss of a character that can't be saved. But they can't be saved in either path. There's an action where you take where you are doing the clearly incorrect, bad, negative thing for everyone. Or there's the one where you're doing as much as you possibly can for good, and you just happen to be unable to save a person. It kind of goes into the idea of what actually, on the other side of things, a lot of people like Cave Story, I can't stand it because of Kuroko. Because I feel like it's an innocent character who's only in the game almost as the cheap shot. It's kind of like the kill the dog moment in a lot of film and movie and shows and stories. Is you can already tell the bad guys in that game are bad guys, and you're already trying to do what you can to stop them. But unless you have impossible meta knowledge beforehand in Cave Story, you can't have a good ending. There's no really technically good ending in Cave Story unless you do things that you wouldn't be able to know without reading about how the game plays first. It's just an impossibility. And so, I can't enjoy Cave Story because, in a similar way to how OneShot works, you can't do the right thing in the confines of the game itself. The game itself is basically pinning you to making a bet. It's why like I said, I won't play a game like Lisa. I already know that there's no happiness to come out of the game. There's no satisfaction at the end of it. And I don't like a game that is that unsatisfying. So again, I don't think the game is inherently bad. I don't think that the original before the update endings are unacceptable. But I do think that if it didn't have this expanded storyline, I don't think I would have been able to enjoy it. If those were the two choices, like I said, I would have rescued Nico, but I wouldn't have felt like I was satisfied in it. I would have been very disappointed in the game, and I might have even left it a negative review. Though, that said, I wouldn't have left a negative review because of its bad programming or its um, interface choices or its character writing. It would have basically come down to the forced choice doesn't lead to a satisfying ending. And when I'm going into a game of this caliber, story based, character driven, I want satisfaction at the least. And as Shin said, it didn't feel like the game was over. It didn't feel like an ending. And so the fact that if you restart, you just end up basically stuck in a permanent time loop until this update came out, I can see exactly why he's saying that. That it doesn't feel finished. And so I guess that's the biggest criticism is it feels like an unfinished story though. You don't know what kind of life Nico would have lived. You don't know if the world would have been saved. You don't know anything of that sort. And again, you're subject to, in the confines of this being a story instead of being just programmed, which is one thing that it keeps trying to mention. And I think a big part of why they tried to write the game the way they did was to make as many robots as there were so that it felt less like you were condemning quite as many people. Um, it it just doesn't feel complete as it was, I guess. I kind of lost my train of thought there. But it just doesn't feel like you're getting enough information to. Because in a case where there's a life or death situation where those kind of decisions are made, you tend to have a little bit of context at least. Or if you didn't have context, the choice would be simple. You choose the person you cared about. Because if there's no other context, what are you supposed to do? You don't have any other information to base that off of. If you were to say you can either rescue your friend or these 10 people die, but it also just so happens that in 10 years in the future, one of the people who was killed would have been the person who discovered the cure for cancer. If you don't have any of that context, then you're not really making a weighted choice. And so in that case, which is I guess where the idea of the split comes from, you'd always choose the person you care about because you don't know anything about all those other people. And so you're not really weighing things on even ground. And again, that's why I don't. Every time you hear about the choice, it's kind of a ridiculous situation anyway. The railroad example, or things like that. And so even in a context of a game like this, and why I would have chosen differently than Shin, you don't know anything about any of the other people. And again, if it is the case where the entire world is destroyed instantly, no one would even recognize it as a consequence, which is a little bit different than in any real world scenario where there would at least be an instant of suffering. Um, I feel like at the end of the day, the biggest thing is, as it's written, it doesn't feel like there's any level of satisfaction in the original endings, other than at least the fact that you could rescue the kid. Which, again, I would have. And Shin chose differently because he saw it in a different way. But again, I can at least see logic in his choice that Nico could still possibly live a good life where he was. Um, it makes me think, though, that the actual choices in the end are free Nico or an infinite loop of the exact same time frame, which you don't know. At least it shows kind of oh, everything's happy and whatever. And then I would imagine that the original storyline as it's being written there is time goes by, he lives for a really long time, frustrated, wants to go home, he breaks the bulb and is freed, and then an alternate universe takes over where he's in. And that's why I find it a really dark concept. Um, but it doesn't have to be that way. As I said, it could be just a situation where he lives a happy life there. He just unfortunately gets separated from his family, which would be terrible. I I I wouldn't ever wish that kind of thing on anyone. If they had any kind of healthy relationship with their family, I would hope they got to live and spend a lot of time with them. But I don't know. I feel like the endings as the original game saw it, I can see why there would have been, I guess, enough of a backlash that by this time they've made an entire additional ending, because I could see a lot of people being upset with how it feels so hollow at the end. It feels, I guess the main word, as I've said several times, is incomplete. It doesn't feel like the entire story is being told. You don't get any kind of narrative on what kind of life Nico lives, or if the decision is the right decision, or anything. And I think part of it is it's trying to pad on the other side of things that both choices are the right choice. I'm trying to make both endings have a positive light, but they don't truly end on positivity. And so it goes back to, as I said, about how I don't like hopeless situations, because in the end, you don't even end on either path with full happiness, I suppose. Because if you've taken anything away from the story, you know that there's still a possibility that this didn't save the world, and that Nico doesn't get to go home. Or on the other side, you are 100% ended with that the world is condemned to darkness or destruction or whatever. I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, my biggest thought on it is that I'm glad that they took the time to expand the story and add this additional ending that we're going to go for, because I would not have been satisfied with that being the ending if I had known that's where it was going to go. I was willing to go through it blind because I'd been told by a lot of people that it was very similar to Undertale. I do disagree in many ways. The closest I would actually associate this more, as I've said numerous times, with I'm Scared, in that it seems a lot more focused on the meta consequences of a game instead of just the things within the physical game itself. There's a focus on the player, the character, and the entity that is interacting with you between the two. That's really similar to I'm Scared. The only difference I would suppose that associates it with Undertale is the fact that it's character driven and cute. But I think a lot of cuteness is lost in a no-win situation. And so I will say I see an association, but I don't see the association. I don't see it as nearly as cohesive a connection as all the people who I talked to meant me to on that. But it is what it is. We experienced it. We experienced the original run, and again, Jen and I were actually the perfect two people for this, and that we came to two different conclusions on what happened. So you can tell that there's a little bit of a difference in our mindset on the fact that I've been rambling so much about our disagreement. I would have definitely saved Nico. I can say that if I'd been on my own, it wouldn't have even had a second guess. To me, the value of the child would have been more important because I understood and knew the child. And the fact that it sounds like if the glass is broken, they're free. I mean, if everyone's gone on an incident, I'm gonna just keep looping if I keep going. We disagreed. That ended up being kind of useful for this because it meant that there was more perspective. However, I feel like I'm just gonna keep rambling. So, oh, this isn't even the right shirt for this. PC96 does make beautiful art, so I wish they would release some things for me to buy because Um, with that said, I'm gonna call it there instead of just saying the same things over and over and over again. Um, we're gonna raid Andy, so I'm gonna head out. Uh, oh. With that said, thank you guys for watching. Have a good day, night, afternoon, morning, wherever you are. See you in real soon, and take care.